So I've been asked to moderate this panel. I can't see you at all, which is kind of weird. You're all blue and very ultraviolet, which is, I might get my hat in a minute. Potentially, I know this panel sounds like it might be incredibly techy and dull, but we just had a little meeting outside around a table there, and within about 2 minutes, everybody seemed to be really arguing with each other, which is really good. So I'm hoping we can kind of continue the conversation that we started out there. So just a quick intro so that you know roughly who we are up here. At the end here you have Mark Purvis. So I met Mark briefly at Camry Marge when I think I was a bit rude to him at a seminar I was doing out there, but he's forgiven me, I think. So I looked him up on his website, and it says here, known to thrive when facing the impossible, Mark is a Mission Digital ideas man for solutions that truly aid the process of your production. Look no further. So that's Mark. And then we have next to him, hot from LA, was it? I guess. We have Jimmy Fusil. Is that the right pronunciation?
Well, if you're French, it's Fusil, but yes.
Fusil, okay, Jimmy Fusil. Okay, joined Netflix in 2016. He leads the team responsible for defining technical specifications and guidelines at Netflix. Then I paraphrased what it said on your website because I couldn't understand it. And it says he evaluates new and emerging technologies and encourages practices that promote fidelity to creative intent. That sounds nice. High quality consumer experiences and content longevity. Okay, good. Right now, more familiar territory. Stephan Pehrsson is BSC member and cinematographer. He shot a large variety of films: Humans, Black Mirror, Les Miserables, which the final episode is on Sunday night.
Yes, correct.
Right. I've been watching.
Oh,
very
excellent.
Nice work.
Excellent. Oh, thank you very much.
He's an NFTS graduate from 2003, so of course he's brilliant. So thanks for coming in. Needs no introduction. Barry Ackroyd joined us yesterday. I think was
yes.
So he's jetted in from Vienna, where I think you were on another panel or something.
Yes, last week.
Okay.
Yeah.
I often use his work teaching at the NFTS. Hurt Lockers. There's nothing in Hurt Locker I can't use for a class. It's just amazing. I think his work shows true versatility and a rare ability to use all the tools available to cinematographers to give his films unique looks, which is very uncommon and absolutely brilliant. He's also a past president of our very own BSC. Then 5, Jet Omoshebi. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Well
done. Jet's a colorist, and she's just moved to Goldcrest and has a long line of amazing credits, including Fortitude, The Night Manager, The Little Drummer Girl. She's worked on several projects requiring both HDR and SDR outputs, so no stranger to the diverging opinions of cinematographers. Now, the great thing about Jet was I was sort of doing a bit of research this morning, and I came across her Twitter account, and it said this: the nicest thing about the People's March yesterday was how united we all were, even the politicians and speakers from all parties getting together, something that's been missing in the UK since the referendum. So,
well done, Jet.
Very nice. And last but not least, Tony Miller. When Tony shot Fleabag for Amazon in 2016, he had to finish both SDR and HDR, and on his website he has quite a lot to say about this, some of which I'm sure he might say today as well. There's also a lovely quote there where he got a phone call one day, and the next day he was on his way to meet Nelson Mandela, and apparently when he met him, he rose from his chair and said in fluent Afrikaans, which he could understand because he speaks Dutch, "Forget about the director, and I want to meet you. You're the only one who really makes these images," which I thought was absolutely great. So welcome, Tony, and welcome, panel. I've shot a lot of films since 1984, and I mostly teach now and occasionally shoot if someone really drags me out there, but it has to be really good. So most of the time I'm enjoying teaching the youngsters and sending them off into night shoots and cold and all those things I don't like doing anymore. So that's us. So now I want to ask something just about the room, but so that we can kind of adjust what we're talking about. So first of all, how many in the room are students? Just put up your hand. So not that many. Okay. How many are working cinematographers? Oh, good. Excellent. Great. Producers and directors? Okay, we can be rude about you then. That's good. And what about post-production? Right, about equal post-production. And now, who hasn't put their hand up? Okay, what one of you, what do you do? Sound. Ah, thank you. Yes. Well done, sound. One more. Camera trainee. Well, you're a student then. Oh, okay. Okay. Teaching. Okay, all right. That gives us, right, we got a flavor now. That's excellent. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I would like the cinematographers, maybe Tony, if we start with you and then kind of work this way, just to give you some personal experience of what HDR has meant in the last few years to their own work, and then we'll move from that discussion into Netflix and Jet perhaps commenting on what they have to say. I do also, just before we kick off, please do interject with a question if you want to, because obviously at the end I'll say, oh, has anyone got a question? But if you do leap up anytime you want, if there's something you want to butt in with, that's it. Right, so.
Well, I started shooting documentaries where you often wouldn't see rushes for many weeks, sometimes months. And it meant you had to be, two things relating to HDR. You had to be really good about lighting and shooting it the way and with the look that you wanted it to have. HDR scares me because, and I'll tell you why, the second thing relating to docs, but it scares me because on set when I'm working, I don't really know, and I think the move from film to digital has exacerbated this, is that I often don't know what I'm lighting for. And I think one key question that we really need to get to grips with is, are we lighting for HDR? Are we lighting for SDI? What format is everybody going to see this on? So that's the first question. The second thing is that I like to light and operate, again, that's come from documentaries, and I'm very precious about trying to continue to operate. And I find with the HDR that I really need to be watching a monitor. And this is about experience. I think shooting film and shooting multiple rows, I think it was when I felt I'd shot 1,000 rolls of film, I had a sense that I could predict what it would look like. And I really can't do that with HDR. And I'm on a real learning curve. And I've done 3 productions that have been divergent and different. One was called Carnival Row. It was a very dark thriller for Amazon, a very big budget with a lot of CGI work, lots of practicals, lots of fire, lots of candles, and a continuously moving camera. I wasn't allowed to operate it. And what I found with that was that the sources, the light sources often would look very different to what I imagined and expected them to look like. So there's a big learning curve. That's the second thing. I think the last thing, I'm going to pass the baton maybe to Jet, is that I feel like I'm learning. And in Fleabag, I've just finished grading the second series last week, which is a lighter show. It tries to have a very naturalistic look, shot anamorphic 239. It's all handheld. And that was my first experience last week of HDR, where I actually thought, I quite like this. I have to relinquish my sense that it's looking the way I wanted it to look, but I'm seeing more 3D depth. I'm able to play with color, and maybe because it wasn't a dark period drama, but a modern comedy drama, that I was able to get to grips with my own prejudice in a way. The other thing that really influenced it was a very, very good colorist who understood what he was doing with HDR. and I think my previous experiences have not been that good. So I think we're all on a learning curve, and the Colourist plays a major part.
Yes.
I think you're right. I think we are all learning from each other. I mean, I think you need to have a good dialogue, really, between us all to find out what it is you don't like about it. But also, it's a very different visual experience. HDR is not. It's not SDR. You're looking at something that's a lot brighter. It's very excitatory, and so you have to make that interpolation. Yeah, you have to kind of. So I think you're not comparing apples and apples, and so there has to be a sort of a learning curve into how to bring those two things closer together. But I mean, there is no reason why you shouldn't be able to translate very, very easily what you have in SDR to HDR. You shouldn't be feeling that you're losing control of your lighting. We should be able to keep that, within and actually use the HDR if you want to. If you want to, really use the full range of it. If you want to push up your highlights to that, you can do that. And make two very different things, if you want to, if that's your intention. But I'm yet to be asked for that. It's generally people want to keep the integrity of what they understand in SDR.
I mean, all I just interject is, even shooting tests for Carnival Row and going through the monitors to try and get some kind of balance. Maybe we should be using ACEs, but to get a sense of this is what I'm looking at and this is what it'll look like down the line is alchemy at the moment. Mm-hmm. And I'd really be interested in what everybody else has got to say about this, because to me, it is still alchemy. I cannot get this pinned down.
From my point of view, it always was alchemy, and it always will be. My experiences. I've done a film for Netflix, which was, of course, 4K plus, and I've graded a film from something like 10 years ago for Netflix, to regraded it because the requirement now is an HDR copy of it. So I've gone through two different ways of looking at it, using a 60mm negative and trying to make it, as the director required, to keep it the same as we'd released the film, not to alter it too much, and also then to make a more recent film for Netflix again. So it is always alchemy, and I've never, as an operating DP as well, I've always been there lighting and using experience and expecting to see what I believe I'm going to see. I think that's what you're saying. I'm a little bit disturbed by the fact that there's a level, and I think technically we need to know. I'd like to know more about it as well. Is to know where that level of HDR can take you. Instead of 1 to 10, as we just discussed, 0 to 10. If 0 was black and 10 was white, we now have an ability to be below 0 and above 10, and is that range, if that gets misused, I think we may have we may be looking at something that we didn't intend to look at.
For sure.
Stephan?
I've sort of I had a very sort of positive experience with HDR. But I've only done it once, so maybe I'm due my surprise, in the future. I did an episode of Black Mirror called USS Callister, which was mostly shot on this spaceship set, with bright lights, and we sort of. My experience with that was I shot it how I would have shot it normal. Actually, I didn't know. When we were shooting it, it was supposed to be, a normal delivery, SDI delivery. Yeah. And by the time we got to the grade, it's like, oh, by the way, it's HDR. So that was a surprise. But in the grade, what I experienced was that I got it to look exactly how I wanted it to look. There was some issues, like with highlights. You had highlights with, so some of the highlights you would just see them all. You would see them as bright as you probably would see them in a real space, a highlight, so you had to sort of work with that. But as soon as you worked that out, than it was like working with anything else. And then there was this benefit, the one you talked about. We had this one particular effect where the one of the characters gets sort of sapped by what's it called? To get moved from one place to the other, beamed. To get beamed, exactly as you do in Star Trek. And when she got beamed, the effect that they put on was so bright they went right up to like 100% of the lighting. So when you saw that in HDR, that effect was just so much more powerful than it would ever be on a normal TV. So it's really interesting that you have this added benefit, like you were saying, So yeah, I had a very positive experience, and I felt, well, so far, that I didn't have to change anything. But I may find I'm doing another grade on Friday next week for another, and that was very different. It was all on location, that kind of stuff. So I might find myself in a very different situation. Who knows?
I think it's important to remember, and maybe we can bring the other guys in here, that there is no standard as such. We don't have to ever hit 1,000 nits or 4,000 nits. You can keep it all very, very constrained if you wish to.
Exactly.
There's no standard as such, or anyone telling us that we have to hit those high peaks. So we can still keep it where it's needed to be. I mean, I don't know what Jimmy thinks.
Yeah, I think that's what I often say, is that it's not a look when I have a conversation with a director or a director of photography about HDR. First thing I say is I don't have an expectation of how bright you're going to make it or how colorful. That's your decisions. But I think it's worked out to me to be, in my perspective, a great framework to maintain creative intent, because you're working with this absolute scale of PQ, which says this pixel is going to be this bright, and you also have this metadata that goes along with it that says and this TV set is aware of its capabilities, and in the case of Dolby Vision, it turns off, it puts in the right white point and all that stuff. So that's, to me, it's the beginning of this great opportunity to have this really seamless link between what the gentleman on this panel intended and what the viewer sees, which I think, having worked in post-production before, and as you do, Jet, you're monitoring in a very calibrated environment that's to a spec, but we also know that once the program leaves, it goes onto TVs that are sometimes much brighter than what you're set up at spec at, and so there's that sadness when you see your show where you're like, oh, it kind of looks like it, and I think we're slowly getting over that, and I think that's the great opportunity. But I also think, like Tony says, that there's some either practices or some tooling that's missing on set to allow you to control that candle that's right behind the main character in that close-up. That's very distracting, that in post you'll find a way to turn down, but right now you're on set and you need to make it look
move it somewhere more advantageous. Make those decisions.
Yeah, but then I can totally contradict myself, because I saw Roma. In HDR, and it was just absolutely amazing. It was better than the experience in the cinema by far, and it was luminous and it had depth, and there was something quite visceral about it because it played so well into the fabric of that film. So
it's black and white.
So it's all the Colourist, basically.
This one thing that I picked up I was in this symposium with similar kind of group of people. A lot of people came up to me and said, do you still grade your films? Because we don't get that opportunity.
Right.
And I think that's diametrically opposed to, obviously, Couron's film, where there's endless amount of colouring and control and throughout, that we as cinematographers, we're sometimes losing control of what we do anyway, And if it gets in the wrong hands, it could be a complete mess. And then you add on top of that, who's got a 4K TV here? Who's got the latest HDR 4K TV? That's two hands coming out from there. So yes.
But is it any good?
It's like, what are we all watching it on? And what are the settings? What do you find? And I think, what do we do when we sit in the grading in the color? Do we look at a screen, or do we look at a monitor, or do we, have a small monitor in front of us, or an iPad? What is it that we're going to be grading this film for. Maybe that's.
So Mark, maybe you could come in here, because in the room outside, I was asking you the question. So when you supply a DIT on set from your company, in the future, is the cinematographer going to have one HD monitor there and then an HDR monitor there? And we'll get really confused, right, if we have two sets of differing visual information. So have you had that request, or how does that work?
I mean, typically, the first thing that we try to push is an ACES color pipeline, and by setting it up right in prep, we find that we get the best results.
So just to say, ACES, by the way, for those who don't know, is an ongoing attempt on reality to control the color right from shooting right through into the grade. Just so you know what.
Things that we need to consider. We need to ensure that the creative intent of the cinematographer is passed on to all the VFX vendors. It gets through to the colorist, and by the time everybody's looking in the DI theatre, the cinematographer should walk in there and feel that the colour decisions that were made at the point of capture are reflective of what they're seeing in the grading theatre. And the more time allocated to polishing the film and less time negotiating with the producers and directors and editors, well, that's not how I intended the film to look, is the measure of our success. Mm-hmm. So I feel as the role as a DIT, my philosophy stems from my time taking photos on 35mm. I would drop the photos off at the film lab, the neg off at the film lab. I would come back 24 hours later, pick them up and open up that packet myself. And the mood of my day would depend on how those images on that 6x4 piece of paper would represent what I saw when I looked through the eyepiece of my camera. Mm-hmm. So I find that whenever a cinematographer looks around at our monitor, if he turns around and goes, oh, that looks cool, he or she says that looks great, then the role of the DIT has been done. But getting back to the question about monitors, it tends to be a budgetary restraint that we're using monitors calibrated to Rec 709 on set. We typically have 4K HDR monitors on a near-set lab if the job requires it. Unfortunately, not all 4K HDR TV shows have the budget to warrant such services, and it's trying to maximise the best support you can give to the cinematographer with the resources that we're afforded.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's also different practices of shooting with HDR in mind. I've heard cinematographers say that they knew they were finishing in HDR, but they wanted to monitor in SDR mostly because there are people around that maybe wouldn't understand how that the HDR would look a particular way, but also just additional confusion of having two monitors on set was not necessarily something that we're ready to deal with. I think that's kind of the nexus we find ourselves at right now, is that cinematographers will have to develop these practices that suit them as to how they expose and monitor for HDR. And I don't think that there's going to be a single way of doing it, because I think there's many ways people expose already in SDR. Some people use the meter, some by eye, some with a waveform monitor, and so I think that's the complication, is that there's a whole new set of practices that
I've got a theory on this,
have to go. Yeah.
And it kind of drives me. I've been, going through this philosophy for a while, but one of the things I find is that quite often you walk into a restaurant and they have vegetarian options, which are basically the meat dish substituted with the vegetables, and you end up with a poor meal, and it just tastes like a bad version of the meat dish. But whereas if you work with the vegetables from the ground up, you end up with this amazing dish and I feel like sometimes we've just swapped the meat, which is the film camera, with the digital camera, and we're all expected to work in the same way, but yet the tool set is actually, it's different, and we've got a lot more that we can do with the digital camera that we haven't really taken on board. And I feel like now that we're looking at HDR and how, especially ACES and how we manage metadata, I think that these, I feel like a cinematographer does need to have an approach to a project thinking that I need to take some sort of ownership over my pipeline.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's what I think the problem is. Back in '84, they produced Super 35, right? I actually shot the second ever Super 35 film. The producer came up to me shortly before we started shooting and said, hey, I know we're doing like 235, but you can frame it for 4x3 as well, can't you? And I looked at this guy and said, no. And he said, yeah, but it's not anamorphic, so you can just, use the up and down and reframe, and you can do both when you shoot. And I said, no. And he said, well, why not? And I said, because you can only compose one image in one format once, and that's it. You can't start effing around with another format. And I'm afraid, I feel, that we're right at that same nexus right now, because the tonal scale, which Barry is talking about, has been this long for a very long time, right from film into digital. It's kind of been hovering around the same amount, projected and on monitors. Now what's happening is that for whatever reasons, and it may be just the future, we're adding 2 stops to the highlights and another 1.5 or 2 to the shadows. So we're creating a different tonal range. Now, the thing is that us guys that's sitting here, we're used to this. So now we have to get used to this. But in reality, for, say, the 30-year-old cinematographer or the 20-year-old cinematographer, in 5 to 6 years' time, that HDR will probably be standard. It will probably be the new standard. And that will no longer feel bright. But what we do now will feel dull. Because if you look at the history of images, that's happened since 1900. So when you look back, it always looks duller than what you have now. So we're in this weird little moment where we're making a new change, and I think it's very difficult for us, personally.
But I think also it's not, you've always been able to capture this higher, this extended range. We've just never been able to resolve it before. We've just never been able to see it before. Whereas now we can see it. So it's not as if what we're capturing is particularly different. We're just able to see a lot more. So it's, you've always been capturing highlights and sky detail. We've just had to make the decision about where we, where. So it's, I think we can also see it as just giving us the stuff that we capture already, like sky detail and details outside windows, but we can also compress it if you don't want to see it.
But the thing is, you seem to be making the argument that you can take what we shoot and make it look perfect in HDR, but experiences at this table seem to tell me, and others I've spoken to, that practicals and windows start getting much brighter than you want them. But is that just a post issue?
No, I think when you have a much brighter display, obviously anything that is bright is going to seem more apparent. So I'm not saying that it won't influence decisions about how things are shot, but maybe not to the extent. I don't think we need.
It's not as big.
It's not as big a change as I think maybe we think it is. And I do think that testing, coming in and having a look at stuff is really, really important, because then you can actually see would you change your lighting for particular scenarios, i.e. If you had a lit birthday cake and you had somebody in shot with that, how bright is that going to be, and what can be done about that if you are in that situation. So I think there, to come in and have a look at that stuff that you're worried about and see how it would look and how it can be controlled.
What I found interesting, I happened to be part of the Dolby process where they basically do you start with an HDR master, and then they they extract an SDI or SDR, what's it called, SDI, but a version out of that, and they have like an algorithm that sort of changes the highlights, sort of falls into the right frame. And it was quite interesting seeing those two images side by side, because you watch that and then you see, oh, that looks a bit paler, but you found out that if you tweaked, if you were allowed to sit there and watch, which I was great, you could actually find a way where both the HDR and the SDR was sort of giving you the same feeling, I found. And basically, you then had the 1,000 nit version, and you had the 100 nit version, and then of course Netflix then makes all the 20 versions in between. But you sort of knew your parameters. You knew the lowest one and the highest one, and it felt like, well, if that's all right, then hopefully the ones in the middle will work out as well. So I don't know. I may be wrong, but I've certainly felt that it was that I had enough control over the various versions. But that's just my sort of personal experience. I know a lot of other people who had a very different experience to me on the same program.
And that's saying that you have control. You were there. You had time to do that. But this was working particularly with Dolby in the development.
Yes.
And your point about there's a birthday cake with 50 candles on it. It's too bright, and then you have to light up the scene. You would do that on film, but isn't that just then? All those things are starting to. I always found that whites could only be white on projected cinema because it had burnt the negative off, the chemicals off the film, and it became white. Yeah. Now there's this place where I found grading like a celluloid film, a Super 16 film, that the highlights, any tiny highlights, there's a lot of them in this room right now, it would just take your eye to it, boom, boom. And I found that really disturbing, especially as the director's instructions were not to change the film. We have to go through this, but we're not wanting to change this film because what we'd shot 10 years before was what we wanted to shoot, and that was and what we delivered was what we wanted to deliver. So I don't know. You're saying, do we have more time to grade films? Well, we don't always have that because we move on to another film. You may be waiting on the grade for all the final visual effects to come in and not have time to finish it. Of course. It's not like we spend 3 or 4 or 5 days grading. It's 5 or 6 weeks grading now. At times. Anyway, that's.
There was a point when I was talking to Jet recently. We were talking about that highlight. Small highlight and tools being developed to deal with that going forward. Acknowledging that. I don't know. Maybe better repeat that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that actually. Like Nick said, it's like, do you find that you have the tools to do highlight management and the color correctors that you're looking for? Because I've seen some colorists have certain tricks to just manage that down, so you're not, you're that searing candle birthday cake is not a problem anymore.
Yeah, there definitely needs to be better tools available, and possibly on set as well, so that the highlights can be managed. You can see where they are. You also have to understand the maths of what's going on. Where your extended highlights are, where they start, and being able to manage those in a sort of very mathematical, clean way. Those tools are starting to come and be developed, really. We have some tools that do that, so we can very easily see where that extended highlight is, and we can work with it.
I think the DIT's becoming really important to me in a way, because I find I have to get my eye in and do tests, as you said, particularly with HDR, understand my latitude, and probably because I'm lighting and operating, and I just don't have the mental energy to go back and forth to a monitor. It breaks my whole process if I do that, and I stop reacting emotionally, and I just don't do nearly as good work. But my DIT saves my arse, because I find that in particularly the first 3 days, they'll tell me, your highlights are here. She's got the pings that Barry's talking about that aren't very nice. We need to talk to makeup about getting rid of that on the nose. She's got to powder her nose more because it's showing here. And I find that I'm having a dialogue with a brilliant DIT very, very frequently. And part of me doesn't like this at all, because it makes me feel like it's out of control. It's something that I'm not really grasping the way I would on film. But actually, I sometimes think it's great. We work as teams. We rely absolutely totally on all our team members. And these days, with fantastic monitoring and really, really good quality DIT technicians, who are one of the most important people in my camera crew now, and I'll go at lunchtime and I'll look at the issues. And so in a different way to what I did on film, I relearn how to kind of immerse that stuff into, all I can say is a process in the first few days of the film, to get me in the zone to sort of know what I'm doing, if that makes any sense.
Would it help you to have an HDR monitor in those first few days, do you think? Do you think that would be something that would help?
Well, I'm trying now to get one permanently in the DIT place, because as I said, I don't, there's a lot of dialogue on set these days from producers back in LA, we've just had it, we had it in Prague with the LA guys telling me, hey, it looks fantastic, it's so light. And I thought, no, it's really dark. There's nothing there. And there's a lot of people who have opinions and a lot of people who feel they have much more technical knowledge now, and they do in some ways. But I like having an HDR monitor privately in the DIT in the DIT zone where the other producers, directors, exec producers times 15 sometimes can't get to it, cannot see it, and then I can look and see. And one of the problems is these highlights that I haven't quite resolved yet.
So we try to ensure that we're always within a BSC cable of a cinematographer. That's our our philosophy. So we like to ensure that the cinematographer can always engage with our technicians and ensure that what they see is what everybody else sees. And when it's signed off, that everybody's on the same page rather than having any disparity between what a cinematographer sees and what the execs see. We believe
How do you do that? Because my experience on set is quite the contrary, is that makeup will turn their monitor up, the director will have a backlight over there that he likes for some reason because he can read his mobile phone whilst he's watching the image or whatever. But there's lots of different people looking in different viewing conditions.
So we're doing a rather large project at the moment where we've made sure that every monitor that's on set has been calibrated by our team. So no one is seeing a monitor that hasn't been calibrated by Mission. And that means that obviously the DIT has the best monitors on set, but everybody else is seeing something very, very close within that. No one's seeing anything with a deep hue shift from what the cinematographer has available. And at the end of the day, this becomes your reference point, and we appreciate that the DOP doesn't, it's quite a remarkable thing to see what a DOP has to orchestrate on set. And, you've got crane moves and performers, that relying on those cues, et cetera, with lighting cues. But that relationship between the DIT and the cinematographer, where the DIT can almost read the cinematographer's mind and understand what you're looking for and make sure that image carries through. And once you've got that relationship, it is a really important relationship. We've had many, Academy-nominated cinematographers say to us that the relationship with the DIT is as important as their relationship with the gaffer. And that's incredibly flattering. When we hear that, we know we're doing our job right.
I think one of the, we tend to talk about film like it's some Shangri-La holy thing from the past, and it was one thing, and it never was. Every few years there was a new film stock. Right, and I can well remember film stocks changing from one contrast to another contrast, and then the cinematographers would all freak out, start phoning up Kodak and saying, this is too contrasty, I can't like this, I can't deal with it. And in a way, I think listening to this HDR discussion, it's like it sends a sense of panic in us all for some reason, and I don't quite know why, but in effect, it seems to me just another incremental change. It feels like quite a big change. But there was only 2 or 3 people in the room who actually put their hand up and said they had an HDR set.
Can I ask another question on that? How many people in the room watch content on tablets?
On tablets. So the rest of you don't watch anything on a tablet, on an iPad?
Me?
Yeah, you do. You all do, right? Everyone.
Can I ask another question? How many people watch content on tablets out on the buses and in daylight?
Daylight.
Like waiting for aeroplanes.
I don't believe this. There's more. Own up.
This is to me is where so if you look at the specs of an iPad Pro, it's a 600 nit display, and
it's Dolby Vision capable too.
Yeah, exactly. And so when people are taking technology out into daylight, the whole viewing experience changes, and to me that's the drive for HDR, in my opinion. That I don't think you can stop Apple. They want to make tablets that are more, provide a better experience to work on in daylight. And Netflix want to have content that people can watch when they're not working.
Well, I think it's also, I mean, I think we're actually in a pretty lucky, and image makers are pretty lucky right now, because the televisions themselves, as well as the tablets and even the phones, are really great screens now. And, you know, they come pretty close to calibration, except, right, I would say tablets do, right? And I think that TV manufacturers are more interested, it seems to me, right now than any time before in the fidelity aspect of the image, because, you know, again, like with HDR, the brightness wars might be kind of over, and the color wars maybe, I don't know. But in general, I think there is this opportunity for fidelity right now. I think it's not just about this brightness. I think it is, people are looking for genuine ways to look at the images and make sure they're a little bit more correct. We just have to make it easier for people to look at it the right way. And a tablet is a great way because it comes out already pretty much correct. And I, you know, it's interesting to see people raise their hands, because I think we tend to forget how predominant HDR now is actually in the marketplace. You know, anybody trying to buy a new TV that is not HDR capable has a really hard time doing so. And the reach is really, really, really great. And I agree that we are in this weird transitional period, and change is super hard. And it's gonna take, and it takes work from everybody along the chain. I mean, I think that's what we're seeing here, that to ensure that experience is genuine, and it's a lot of work.
Also, I think HDR just does give you much more value. I mean, you know, I think it can give you much more value.
Definitely.
I think, unlike all of the other technology jumps that we've had recently, I think HDR actually gives you more creative value.
That and with the increased color palette as well.
Yeah, and wider color gamut. You know, I just think you can
More depth.
More depth. You get more in every direction, really.
I just want to get back to the. I mean, we were talking before about Rec 709, and one of the things, you know, we're all sort of still in this Rec 709 world. Rec 709 was invented for CRT television. Now, I'd like to ask everybody here to put their hands up if they own a CRT television.
Me.
Whoa!
Wow, that's a lonely world.
Yes.
But so Rec 709 is a.
How do you do it?
Very old Mac Mini running OS 10.
Wow. Can we talk afterwards and like nerd out?
Mac Mini. Wow.
It's interesting.
Mine's a 1982 Toshiba.
So as soon as we started to see LCDs come out into the world with various brightness levels, all of a sudden Rec 709 started to fall into a weird world where we just ended up with inconsistencies from monitor to monitor to monitor. And, you know, thanks to tools like Dolby Vision now, we're starting to actually give the cinematographer and the creatives more control over translating what's done in the grading theatre to what's being projected.
And can I say, it's now the question is, okay, we've agreed it can be a much better tool, use it right. How do we deliver it now to the audience in a way that is as accurate as possible? This was the golden era of cinema, was when every cinema had the same bulb and the experience was shared throughout the world, or whatever. Now we want to share that technologically. We need to share that experience.
Can I just make one point? I was in Australia where we got the film prints last. So by the time the film prints got to us, they looked like you wouldn't want to see them.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, you do? Yeah, I remember. Yes. I do recall. Yes, you're right. Yeah, all the scratches. Okay. Yeah, true.
There's cinematographers, I think, throughout the ages, they always want to do the final grade and say, that's how my film looks, and it's perfect, and they walk away. And what I say to the youngsters now is I say, you can get it right once in one room.
Yes.
Never look at it again anywhere else under any circumstances, because you will hate it.
Yeah.
And it's just so true.
I'm not like a great self-promoter, but one thing that I'm super proud that Netflix actually did was work with Sony on this calibrated mode, which really, I mean, you can take most TVs these days and you can calibrate them, but it's a lot of menus and it's hard to get through all of that and to know they're all called different things on different makes. And to have actually just a button where you can flip it on and it goes to the right white point, it turns off the flow mode that everybody in this room hopefully hates. But
So how do you buy that TV that'll do what you're talking
so that's
about?
right now it's the flagship Sony TVs, but I think it shows a willingness on the part of manufacturers who are, we have to recognize they are the window to your images, to start paying attention to that. And I think that's a super exciting thing for all of us right now, to know that getting to see it correctly, or the way intended, the way that you saw it. Because I working in post, you're working in this calibrated room, and this is the ideal place to view it. And in the times where we still were dealing with SDR and TVs that were actually much brighter than the mastering monitor, you kind of knew that once it went out into the world, there wasn't necessarily going to be an opportunity to see it that way again. So I think this is a great time. I think being very vocal on the part of image makers, saying like, yeah, this is really important, and we think it's really great that this is happening, is a really powerful thing, because I think people are listening now.
I think you put it as fidelity is the added value. I think once you've started that on that route, then every other TV company will want to do, a TV manufacturer would want to follow that, because if you're going to make a choice between a regular old TV and set it with some sports setting, where the colors are all over the place, or watch the thing that it was intended, I'd like to think that people would choose the one that's with fidelity.
And I think people do many things with their TVs. They play games on them, and they want certain things when they do that, and they watch football on it, and they want something different. I think it's just making it easy, and making it an easy choice to view it as you intend, I think is just the only thing that needs to happen.
I would say that the settings on most TV sets are absolutely pointless, really.
Hotel.
It's like a toy town, something going on, isn't it? Like, you slide this along here and slide that along there, and, and they've probably got a menu written up in front of it. What are you looking at?
It's hard.
So we need to get a grip.
Can there be a hotel setting? Because hotels are the worst. They're just blue and red.
We spend a lot of time in hotels as cinematographers, and I often just
see
watch
our films in hotels.
and they see our films.
Yeah,
so
it's awful.
Hotels are we're the gravediggers of hotels, but the iPad is what I go back to so often in a hotel, and I'll just look at it on the iPad, because I know that that's a reliable source for me to know that it looks correct. And I was thinking, I'm not actually convinced that in my film days, and that the films actually did always look as I intended them to do, because of the prints and because of the cinema and the bulb and the crappy whatever it might be. And I wonder actually whether these days I'm seeing things much closer to how I intended them.
I think this new TV HDR set through the metadata is really going to challenge cinemas, because cinemas are struggling with the brightness of screens, with ambient light, with speckle, and things are looking better.
Don't watch Roma in 4K HDR. You just won't go back to the cinema. Roma in 4K HDR, you won't go back. I mean, it's incredible.
I agree. I mean, and the guy's not even an official cinematographer, and his work just looks.
Yeah, but he's got a good friend.
He's got a good friend, but it looks absolutely incredible. And there is something. I mean, Barry's. I think you're talking about the Hurt Locker, which I just adored, and always I could smell and feel and experience the emotion throughout that film. But looking at Roma, I had this similar thing that on HDR, I mean, emotionally, it's even more powerful than it was in the cinema, significantly.
Oh, wow. Cold War's a better film. Anyway, so I'm just going to, in a second, open up questions, just in 1 second. I just want to say one little experience, because, we've been having a quasi-technical discussion here, but I just want everyone to think about the fact that image reception, when you look at images, you learn to do it, right? And there's lots of studies when people took cinema out into native tribes and God knows where, they all ran around and couldn't read the images. So I personally had an experience of this because when I was 18, I left England and I didn't see television for 7 years. I saw not a single television. And when I left the country, it was black and white. And when I came back to the country 7 years later, television was color. And my mum brought me into her sitting room and said, "Darling, let's watch the news." And sat me down on the sofa, and this television came on in color. And I just fell on the floor laughing, just collapsed with laughter. And for about 90 seconds, my brain couldn't read that color. It looked like a pancake makeup man in a silly studio, and none of the colors were right. And my mother was, "What are you laughing at?" And I just kept pointing at this television, saying, "That is insane. It's ridiculous." But the weird thing was...
It'll never catch on.
Colour will never catch on. But about 2 minutes later, it literally took my brain 2 minutes to read it. And then I recovered, and I've never been able to see that again. But that was such a great illustration for me of why this tonal scale, we're playing on a piano this wide right now, and now you've added some bass notes and some treble, and get used to it. You know, that's it. So, all right, so we're going to pass the microphone around. So there was a gentleman down there, I think, who wanted to ask a question. There we go. There you go, yeah, we can hear you.
So thanks for that, I thought that was great. And I love what Jimmy said about tablets. I use them for remote grading all the time because you can't rechange them, and they are quiet. Jet has a lot more HDR experience than me, so I'd just like to make sure that I'm actually understanding what she said, because I pass on the same information. You're basically saying that HDR is actually a display technology. The cameras have been HDR for ages. This is a post-production thing. And to understand better, we just, the display has got a bit brighter. So 0 to 100% used to be 100 nits, and now it's 1,000 nits. And as usual, the colorist is just going to map that, and that's what colorists do. And there's no such thing as too much information, because that's what we just keep the bits we like, change the bits we don't, and throw the rest away. So things like your highlights, great. We've got footage when we keep them, and if not, if anybody is using it, I know it is in post-production to fix it. It's called texture highlights and base light, and there's another one for Resolve, and that's been solved for a while. But is that how you describe it? It's gotten brighter, and my advice to first-time DOPs normally is, have you ever shot film? And they go, yeah. I go, do that, and normally they come back and go, it's basically the same thing, you just got to get the right colorist, and then you're grand.
Yeah, I mean, basically, obviously, when you change the scale of something, the perception is slightly different. So the immediate emotional response might be different, because if you've got increased highlights, then the rest of the tones might look different. So you have, but that's part of a colorist's job is to wrangle that. So I'm not trying to say, go off, don't worry about it, we can make it the same. It will be different because we're looking at something different, but it's not a totally different thing, and it's all of our jobs to kind of, to manage that. Yeah.
It seems to me there's a difference between HDR and SDR, and that can lead to problems. And I'm curious if you think the better place to fix those problems is on the set, which would mean you have to monitor HDR and SDR on the set, or in post. Or where is it cheaper to fix it, or where do you still have the control to fix it?
Who are you asking?
DPs.
Oh, the DPs. Okay, Stephan.
I don't know. I don't have enough experience to really say. I'd be curious to have an HDR monitor, because I have no idea what a camera displaying HDR images live on set looks like. I actually don't know. I only been looking HDR on set, so I get that experience in the grade, and then we manage it. So, but I'd be curious. to try. So I don't know. You seem to have more experience.
I mean, I could answer that just by saying, for instance, I shot Scene in Fleabag with festoon lights, and on the anamorphic, I thought they just drop off nicely, and then in the HDR they're so bright that they and they're bent as per anamorphic, and they are way too dominant. Now, my attitude on set is I've got to fix that on set, because actually the way we fix it in post isn't a very clever way of doing it, and I end up doing for me, too much. I'm doing way too much, and then I'm not focused in on the drama that I've lit. So I would dim them down significantly more. So that I would do on set. Candles and Carnival Row, for instance, where I was using candles often as the main source, and I had them very close to people's faces. But I wanted them there because I wanted them that close because it gave me the sense of the emotion of being in a very, very dark place and why they did it. And I'd like to carry on doing that. So that's the kind of thing that I would pass the baton to Jet and say, I want to fix this in post because I want someone to be able to hold a candle here.
And I would say that I rely on the DIT when I'm shooting digitally, but I don't spend a lot of time there because I'm always behind the camera and looking on a digital camera, looking through definitely not an HDR monitor. You're looking at a pretty poor image, to be honest. When it was on film and you had an optical viewfinder, a good one, you could judge everything. The exposure, the depth of field, everything was all very, very clear. So we've had to adapt to that anyway. If you're shooting digitally, you have to adapt to, if you're going to operate as well, you have to look through kind of inferior kind of an image in a way. But rely on the DIT, and I would do it in post is more than on set.
And as you're from Ari, I can just add one thing to that. Is if you could give me an Arton monitor to look through and then a really good little HDR monitor on the top of the camera, I'd be a happy camper.
Yeah. I always thought that, yeah.
So Barry, do you want an HDR viewfinder? Electronic viewfinder?
I think what we just said there, Tony, if you had an optical viewfinder, we always thought this when the first digital cameras come out, when the first electronic cameras came out. Wow, and I think
there was
Panavision tried it, I think, to put as well, to put in an optical viewfinder, but obviously it was to do with issues of shutters and information getting onto a sensor, which are done
it's actually the brightness with the optical viewfinder. Once the Alexa Studio has an optical viewfinder, but people found that the sensor is so sensitive that it sees more than your human eye sees. So what the electronic viewfinder can show you is brighter than what you see through the optical viewfinders.
Yeah, and some light was being taken away as well. So well, that was always the case with the shutter. I guess this is just an old guy, and I'm just like we shot. We started off with cameras. If you look through some of the cameras of the 1960s, 70s, 80s. They weren't that great, and we adjusted, and we're adjusting to this. So
it's a framing device.
Yeah, if they could they put an HDR? Would it be a good idea? Would it be a nice thing to look at all the highlights and
get a headache.
Distracted by it? I think not.
You'd get a
headache. Looking at that all day, you would be exhausted very quickly.
Would it need to be bright, or would it need to be?
But you don't need it.
I mean, that's actually one thing that we don't really talk about.
More than brightness.
Well, we actually haven't spoken about how much more graduation you're seeing in your shadows. We spend a lot of time talking about highlights, and we haven't really spent much time talking about the fact that you now see color from a light emitting device. I mean, typically in P3 color space, you tend to see reflected light, not projected light, and so we get that, and also I do.
Your blacks aren't gray anymore, right? They can be true black, and those grays can be detail.
Yeah, you can see much more into your blacks than you before, and I could say that there's been TV shows that I've worked on in the past where you'd really, you would have liked that because you have got dark skin tones in shadows.
Okay, so
I just like to put a statement. I've worked for a decade as a colorist and DAT at the birth of digital cinematography with Antidote Mental and also with Nick. And I just want to say, from my own experience now as a cinematographer, just to embrace the new technology. I was a year ago thrown into the testing ground when 2 days before I started shooting a show in India. I was told that it was supposed to be HDR, and knowing the technology and everything, I haven't done anything HDR. I just knew that it's going to be a challenge and new things. So I phoned up colorists and a few technicians who've done it to get my advice and my own kind of take on it.
Yeah.
And I had to change the whole lighting concept because it's a wedding show, so basically all of the stuff, the original plan was to shoot these bright lit weddings more on a practical base, to kind of have the 2,000 candles kind of lighting the show a little bit more. And I knew that I'd have to change that. And that's basically, I had to figure it out. We did it on the fly. And later when I was sitting in the grading, was one of the first HDR grades to be done in India, I realized actually, okay, I lit it differently to what I would have done it actually if it was SDR. But what I got out of it in terms of the colors, the saturation and the color depth and all of it, and also like the brightness, actually, I liked it a lot. And I think it's a new technology. We're all learning about it. And because I've been both working as colorist and as cinematographer now, I think it's super important for DPs to be open in this conversation with the colorist. And like basically colorists don't know certain things about lighting, and I think if both sides learn from each other, I think we can take HDR to a completely new level, and then it's kind of actually just extending our palette. Just to give another example, I regraded last week. I started on a few shots of a film that was graded in SDR. I graded 3 years ago in SDR, and we just opened a few scenes, and it's about a pianist who turned blind, and she starts to see again. So we didn't really need that brightness, so we maybe went 20% brighter than an SDR. But there are these moments where she starts seeing, and basically like a candlelight or like window opening actually gets much more brighter. So we only change these little bits in those scenes, and all of a sudden you can get an emotional response, and actually you feel the light. You can feel the light. We didn't change anything else in this whole film. It stayed like a matte and a very kind of subdued kind of brightness film. But then,
Was there a question?
Sorry.
That's okay. Anybody else? Okay, fine there. Thank you. It's fine.
Yeah, this is kind of everybody. So, obviously, with cinema, it's all about the sense of presence. Does HDR give us an expanded sense of presence? Obviously, hopefully, have this new range. And if your average picture level is as low as it was with SDR, are you benefiting from HDR? Is it giving you a better sense of presence? And is it relevant for every production? So obviously, you always have new highlights and you want to see more in the shadows, but is it always relevant if, as Jet says, you're not always using those peak brights and those real dark shadows? Is it relevant? Obviously, moving forwards, from digital, but does every digital production have to be HDR? Especially if not everyone's watching HDR.
I have a very strong opinion about that, but I'd love to hear
Go
from
ahead.
others as well. But we've been involved in a lot of productions that have been finished in HDR or shot with HDR in mind, or sometimes not, but then finished in HDR. Some of them are cooking shows. Some of them are documentaries. Some of them are comedy specials. And a lot of them are series and cinematic films. And when we first approached that, putting HDR on the service, we really focused on things that were, okay, this is going to be a visually impactful program that has a high contrast look or is colorful. And we quickly realized that, that wasn't the only good thing about HDR. The creative intent part of it was really important. But the fact is that all visual mediums, with whatever story that's relying on images, benefits from having those options, whether they use them or not. We have movies on the service and TV shows where the HDR and the SDR feel very similar and they look very similar, and that's a creative choice. But always there is that feeling of opportunity, and secondly, just that feeling of image quality, because you are feeding a device a signal that actually, has true black and has reference to the mastering environment in mind. And so that's why we're going to continue looking at all types of shows and all types of movies, and not just the ones that are, have spaceships that blow up and things like that. I don't know about how people feel.
I've got a question for
They look great in HDR, but I mean, there's other stuff too.
Harris.
Yes, Harris.
Jimmy, it's a question for you. How does Netflix ensure that we as cinematographers get to have a hand in an HDR transfer, even for things we've shot in the past, and how do we look after what we have to do for
future presentations in a way? How do we ensure that it's... Is
Sure.
there a policy from Netflix in inviting cinematographers? Is there a way that you've thought of that could help?
So I'm going to answer the question in reverse because I've answered this question at a different panel where there was a rumor that we only, let cinematographers have 2 days in the grading room or something like that. And then I went back and I said, okay, I'm going to talk to my post-production people and ask if that's true. It's absolutely not true. Our position as a studio and as a distributor is, whoever is invited to the grade is invited to the grade. So do we have we put forward a stance where that is, I think what you're asking for, where we require it? At this point, no. What we do intend, though, is to make sure that the creative intent is carried through our platform completely and to not touch the image once we receive it. So that's the guarantee that we can offer at this point. I think that hearing from Barry and other DPs, that is an important question for the cinematographers and the DOPs, that the image authorship continues into post-production now, and that involvement is important to the community. And I think everybody, I can say that everybody that I work with at Netflix understands that. But that is, I think, a question that a single studio can't fix, honestly, and can't answer. But I think, personally, I totally agree with you. Authorship does not stop at the censor anymore. It goes all the way to the grade.
I think it also depends on the time scale and when things are being done, and if you're doing two versions, what's the hero version, and so there's the HDR or the SDR indeed might be the afterthought, and so scheduling that and working out availability can be a problem.
Yeah, and I didn't answer your remastering question, but I can tell you that, at least from our point of view, we've already started remastering some shows because we didn't start doing HDR the minute we started doing originals. And we absolutely do want to include the crew in there and the image makers in there. It's very important for us that every part of the image be creatively approved. Now, who is in that driver's seat, I think, is what we continue to hear some debate about. But that is absolutely essential to us, that it's not something that we want to do without any input, because again, that's not genuine and that's not authentic.
Just say, from a third party, I've not seen any studio commit as many resources as Netflix to reaching out to cinematographers. And I mean, they were there at Camera Image, they're here today, and have actively, engaging with a lot of cinematographers and companies like ourselves to ensure that, what's intended is carried through.
Yeah, I don't think yes. I've never been on a panel with Paramount and Sony and Warner Brothers post-production.
Definitely not.
No, very much not. And
yeah.
this is a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
And also we've already had a number of us have had Blu-rays made of films we've shot in the past. And so far, the percentage rate of people who approach me to make a Blu-ray is maybe 25%. Mm-hmm. So it's very nice when they do call you and say, we're making a Blu-ray, I'll give you 2 days to regrade it. But a lot of people, I suddenly go in the store or somebody says, hey, have you seen the Blu-ray of... And you go, no. And then you go look at it and it's a mess, or it's not done very well. And that's very upsetting.
Yeah.
But I think also the BSC, Imago, us lot, that's also up to us to put pressure on producers, on image, anyone who's reproducing images, they should talk to the cinematographer. We do it for free, those kind of things. We'll turn up.
Don't say that.
No grading for free.
And if you've ever worked, on the Netflix project where something does not look correct, find a way to reach out to us. I can tell you that we have actually scoured Twitter to make sure that, when somebody has a complaint, that we actually take a look at it, or scour the forums. But if you're public about it, or you can go through your association and let us know about it, we will look into it. we're committed to fidelity from the moment we started putting other people's work on our platform. We were looking for the right aspect ratio. We were looking to make sure that we were not showing the pan and scan as much as possible. And so we're committed to that. So if you find something that's wrong, let us know.
Yeah. So, gentleman there.
I was wondering what your view is on 8K being the current technology of the future, or do you think it's overkill?
You're talking to me.
No.
I think Barry's got a few things.
No,
to say
it's just that I mean, Netflix only require 4K. I never understood why the 3.2 of an Alexa wasn't good enough.
Happy to answer that because I know that's a question on a lot of
old chestnut.
But in doing that, then and it's a time of the technology changing. It encouraged us to use an 8K sensor rather than, because I don't think there is such a thing as just there is now, but there wasn't then. And the 8K got misused in my mind by reframing, and not by the cinematographer but by the editor and the director later, which is a horror story to cinematographers, but in the context of the film, it was, that's how it was. I don't hold a grudge much, but it's, that's possible to do that, and I think is that the answer to 8K, or the other answer would be, do we need 8K? What can you see? What are you going to see that's different? And I think the HDR is to say that that is a fundamental difference. If you're going more information and HDR, is that better or worse?
So I just got back from Prague, and this is crazy, but you could see these advertisements all over Prague, not from a TV manufacturer, but from a bank encouraging finance on 8K Samsung TVs. And I mean, they're just advertisements everywhere to take a finance package on an 8K TV.
Well, that's just selling TVs. It's not
that's
making
the bank
films.
selling TVs.
How much 8K content is around?
Well, the other thing we've got is we've got 5G coming, and once you've got 5G and that bandwidth, you'll be able to actually get that media to your 8K TV. So to think that the infrastructure doesn't exist.
But will it be better? Is this an improvement, or is it just another sales pitch?
I'm not one to say what's better and what's not. I'm just there to facilitate. So,
Jet, what do you think?
I think maybe capturing 8K is useful, but I think maybe displaying 8K is not particularly useful. I spend a lot of my time actually cutting down the resolution of what you shoot anyway, by putting grain or defocusing or just. Yeah, I'm normally asked to destroy resolution rather than keep it. So, but I think capturing in 8K is valid. Yes, certainly, certainly for the future, and certainly to have all that information.
I disagree.
Well, I think 8K is
it's deep.
a threat to our cinematography.
Dick, just take the microphone.
And do what we.
Say it again.
I think 8K is a real threat. I think it's a tool not for improvement of image, but absolutely for reframing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened.
Why do you need a mid shot? Why do you need a close up? We can just create it out of the wide shot, or we'll create the close up out of the mid shot. I think it's incredibly dangerous and puts the integrity of the image completely at risk.
So I got something subjective, but when I saw camera image a few years ago and everybody talking about 8K, and there was a lot of comments that I agreed with, that the image actually started to look softer on an 8K acquisition than it did on a 4K acquisition, and the pixel density meant that it was getting close. Like the sensor size versus pixel density meant that you ended up with a less sharp image than you would have on a 4K capture.
Yeah, interesting.
So that's me being subjective, but I'd be interested to to get other people's point of view on that.
I think what Dick was trying to say, though, is that once you have that amount of information, and it will get misused, and that's...
It got misused on 4K acquisition.
Yeah, I agree, Film didn't used to get abused so much. And of course, we have to know there's a fundamental difference between blowing up a wide-angle shot to make a close-up is not the same as putting on a different lens and shooting it, and that is, there's a lot of fundamental things there.
I can tell it within like 5 degrees of that it's not the shot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, it's a zoom in.
Flag it up in, has this been, yes, always the thing. Yeah, we just reframe it.
Yeah.
But I think that was.
Not the film that I showed.
I'm not defending that practice, but I think it was also happening when we went into the DI process to start with, and we were, acquiring on film and finishing on digital. That capacity was there, and yes, certainly you saw a difference in the texture, right? Because the grain was the giveaway, but that didn't necessarily stop people from doing it even then. I think that's to me that's less a. I think technology can bring up these types of questions, but they are essentially human questions of trust and respect of work. And I don't know that. I think that that's where they're going to be solved. Maybe that's my opinion.
Mark.
I've not talked to some single cinematographer who's asked me for 8K. I think right now it's totally unnecessary, and I find it very sad because it's the TV display manufacturers competing with each other. It's Japan the manufacturing might of Japan trying to compete with the manufacturing might of Korea. That leads to this kind of new technology that we then end up with and have to somehow deal with if we want it or not.
Well, you've also got NHK, which is funded by the Japanese government to develop new technology, and it pays an economical.
Isn't there a point though that if you're going to shoot 8K, an 8K deliverable would be like shooting 4K, a 4K deliverable, it won't be, I don't know, are we allowed to zoom in to 4K and deliver it to Netflix as a 4K, or do we have to retain? We're
looking for parity between, or more than that, between the capture photocyte density and what's displayed, because we believe that yes, the screens are getting bigger, they're getting more contrasty, and we want to be in the same practice that we have been for 80 years, which is capturing higher resolution images so that we can, when we have the opportunity to remaster for new display technology and invite the talent that's there to do it, we want to be able to take that opportunity. But we're also a very young studio against, with working and competing with other studios that have very large libraries of film
if I
at
shoot
4K.
On a 4K camera,
yeah,
and I zoom in 20%. I'm at 3.2. Rings a bell somewhere.
Yeah.
Can I deliver that to you? It was shot on a 4K, sir, but you've only got 3.
No, so we actually do have guidance around that, because we do not want that degradation of that resolution. So we'll allow it to some extent, because sometimes you need to do it to fix a problem, or we allow a certain amount of a movie to not be shot on a 4K camera, because sometimes you need to put a little tiny crash cam or do an underwater shot. We have to be realistic about the realities of production and getting the right shot. But we are aware of that, and we keep an eye out for that, because that to us is not going to produce a good result.
So then with the 8K, we have to convince the producers that to make that future-proof, they're not allowed to zoom in any more than a...
Well, I think...
and only occasionally.
I mean, beyond future-proof, I think it's also just having an understanding of each other's work. But it's, certainly shooting in 8K does give you that opportunity to do that a little bit more, and it still fit Netflix's spec, but I don't think that's the problem here. I think the problem here is the feeling that somebody is tampering with somebody else's work, which is something that has to do with relationships between creatives more than a studio mandate, I think.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up quite soon, but one more at the back there.
I was just actually, to clarify, the gentleman's question up front about future-proofing cinematographer's intent, isn't that the entire point of the ACES committee? Wasn't that was the reason they were convened, was to solve that precise thing, rather than the studios, was by the ASC in order to solve that your images in the future, no matter what displays are invented, or 2087 should still work thanks to ODTs. With 8K, having worked in Japan, I was going to say I've never heard of an artistic use of 8K. I do know for the Olympics in 2020, though, it's going to be 8K, 120 FPS, Rec 2020, and the only purpose for that is for, in a stadium, huge screens where, for a football match or something, your eye can wander 8K screen from a distance.
I have to say, watching 8K, a football match in 8K is a pretty spectacular experience. I can't say...
Frame rate is also included as well.
I haven't seen... I can't imagine drama in 8K, but if you want to watch football, you don't need to cut to another camera. You watch it and it's like being in the stadium. And that was 5 years ago that I watched that.
But I just thought separating the artistic from the things like the sports applications, 8K is that. And on a side note, if we're talking about HLG, not HLG, but PQ as HDR, then an optical viewfinder should match an HDR viewfinder, seeing as PQ stands for perception quantizer, but that's a side note. Anyone else?
So
the ACES committee should solve the cinematography.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, but ACES is like a 5-hour subject, so I don't think we can really go to ACES right now. All right, we'll have one more. Yes, from you, sir.
Sorry, last question. Is there any difference or any preferred method for capturing HDR in terms of the camera?
So is there any say that again?
From the cinematographers, are they preferring to use any particular camera package or is there any difference in capturing for HDR, or are they just using the same setup?
Oh, in terms of the dynamic range of the cameras?
Yeah.
No, I think most cameras capture high.
Yeah, but they do differ a little bit.
Tiny bit, but yeah.
Well, like the Alexa 65 and the regular Alexas.
Well, it changes the lenses.
Stop, so.
I mean, the big difference to me would be your choice of lenses. With some cameras, with some larger sensors, you're ruling out a whole series of lenses that have existed for 100 years. So, and you're having to go to larger format. And larger format means bigger cameras, and bigger cameras means less flexibility in movement. All those things. And then there's outside here, there's all these brilliant ways of moving cameras that we never dreamt of. So, I mean, technology is playing, playing games with us, but we'll adapt, I guess.
Choice of codec could be important there as well.
Yeah, the bit depth of your capture, and I think also the chroma subsampling, and you're going to use that precision. You're going to maybe want to use that precision in your HDR grade. So, the higher the bit depth, probably the better. But, I don't know if you have any.
The sensors there, it's just making sure that gets to
the recording, yeah.
To get to the post facility.
Yeah, but in a way, Nick's point, which to counter Netflix would be that, I like the LF. I've just had a look at it, but it's a big camera and big lenses, and that doesn't always fit what I like doing for specific projects. Sometimes I'd like to be on a 16mm Arton again, because it gave me an ability to do things that I can't do with an LF and a big lens that long. And I wish that Netflix would appreciate that that we can make exceptions to say, okay, we're going to try and capture on 4K, but sometimes actually we want this to look different to 4K capture.
We absolutely welcome those conversations. I mean, the rule, if we want to call it that, is there to ensure certain practices, but we want the story to be told the way that it needs to be told, and we're happy to have conversations about these things and to find solutions. We just want to make sure that, I'll say it this way. Our goals are very similar. We want accurate presentation. We want the great image quality, and what I mean by that is fidelity. We want it to be an impactful experience to see the story and hear the story, and that's paramount. We also have certain, understanding of the devices that people watch things on and how good or not so good they are at handling different resolutions. So we want to have these conversations with you because we don't want you to feel like you're pinned in a corner making the wrong choice to tell the story. We do want to have those conversations, but we, as a distribution platform and as people who are going to be custodians of of this work for a very long time, we also have to think about where the technology of displays is moving and where the consumer experience is moving. We're trying to connect people who make stories to people who enjoy stories. And that's a lot of responsibility. And we're taking an approach that is trying to be fairly careful and mindful of everyone in that chain. So yes, let's have a talk if there's something that's problematic. But like many studios, we have priorities, and as a distribution medium, we also have certain priorities and certain, and they're similar to yours, but maybe in a different order. So I'm here to listen. I'm here to have conversations, and I welcome it. I totally welcome it.
Okay, I think I'm going to wrap this up. I just want to say that, you know, filmmaking, cinematographers, it's engineering and it's artistry. Engineering has always been about perfection. It's about achieving the best possible piece of engineering. That can be an image, it can be a bridge, a space rocket. Artists, people who tell stories, in a way, I think, are interested in imperfection. Imperfection is about what we are, because that's how we got here in the first place, crossbreeding. And so there's always going to be an absolute war between engineers and artists. It's just a natural thing. We've done it the whole century with cinematography, bringing out lenses we hated, cameras we hated, stocks we hated, and then ones we loved. And I think this is the same deal. I think this is what's going on right now. I'm very grateful for you for coming from Netflix. And I think all of us moving forward, I personally see this technical change as quite a big one, much bigger than, say, the SD to HD. Say we got a Bond film now that's shooting in 65mm film for some strange reason. But I haven't heard them talking about HDR, but it seems to me HDR is actually a much more important thing than shooting 65mm film, because it's affecting the entire tonal scale of the way we shoot and the way we see. But the way we see, of course, changes every decade. And so in 10 years from now, what we're shooting right now is going to look a little dull, because that's just nature. That's how it works. Our perception changes. So that's what we were talking about today, and thank you very much. And I'll see you all again soon, I hope. Thank you for coming.